At the bus stop, a small boy from the poorest block froze as the driver barked, "No pay, no ride," and slammed the door toward an elderly woman trembling in the snow after losing her purse. Despite having only $5, he still couldn't ignore the cruelty unfolding in front of him. So he made a choice. He stepped forward and paid for the stranger. That single act of courage would change everything, because the woman he helped was the mother of one of the richest men in the state. And when that billionaire learned what happened, his entire world was about to be turned upside down. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. Subscribe and hype, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. 12-year-old Tommy Reed stood on the corner of the wealthiest street in Riverside, clutching a worn notebook in one hand and his bus fare in the other. He watched the sleek cars glide by, wondering if anyone inside them ever worried about how they would get home. The January wind in Riverside was different than the wind in Millbrook. Here on the wide avenues, lined with oak trees and wrought iron gates, the breeze carried the smell of wood smoke from fireplaces and the faint scent of expensive evergreens. It whispered through bare branches with a polite reserve, even as the sky darkened with the promise of snow. In Millbrook, where Tommy lived, the wind had teeth. It howled through window cracks and carried the metallic bite of coming storms and the diesel smell of buses that never ran on time. Tommy tightened his grip on the plastic grocery bag he carried. Inside were his father's work gloves, forgotten on the kitchen counter that morning. His father, Robert, was still at the construction site 3 blocks behind the mansion, working a double shift in the freezing cold. Robert had been an office worker until 6 months ago, a data analyst who could find patterns in numbers the way other people found shapes in clouds. But his manager had made sure that talent went unrewarded. When Robert's cost-saving analysis threatened to make his boss look incompetent, the termination paperwork appeared within a week. Performance issues, it claimed. A lie that stuck like tar. So Robert took whatever work he could find. His hands, meant for keyboards, now gripped shovels and hammers. The work was hard, the pay worse, but it kept the lights on. Barely. Tommy adjusted his thin jacket against the wind. He was small for 12, with sandy brown hair and watchful green eyes. He checked the time on his old watch. The number 40 bus was due in 3 minutes. If he missed it, he would have to walk 4 miles in the dark, and his mother needed her evening medication by 6. The bus stop sat at the borderline between 2 worlds. Behind him, the Riverside mansion stood proud on the hill. Ahead, the road sloped down toward the highway, the factories and the row houses where people like Tommy lived. He wasn't alone at the stop. An older woman sat on the far end of the bench, looking like a piece of fine porcelain left out in the weather. She wore a coat that had once been expensive, navy wool with pearl buttons, but now it looked rumpled and soiled at the cuffs. Her white hair was pinned up, though strands had escaped and blew across her forehead. She sat with rigid posture, her gloved hands folded in her lap, staring at the street sign as if it held answers to questions she couldn't remember. Tommy studied her from the corner of his eye. She didn't belong here. The number 40 carried tired nurses, construction workers and people like Tommy who were invisible to the rest of the world. This woman looked like she belonged in one of those mansions on the hill. Yet here she sat, shivering as the temperature dropped and the first snowflakes began to fall. The woman suddenly patted her coat pockets with urgency. She looked down at the ground, then at the empty bench beside her. Her movements became frantic. "Ma'am," Tommy said quietly. "Are you okay?" The woman turned to him, startled. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, a striking pale blue but clouded with confusion. "My bag," she said. Her voice was refined, cultured, but edged with fear. "I had a handbag. I know I did. I set it down somewhere." Tommy looked around the empty sidewalk. "Did you maybe leave it where you were walking?" "I went to see the gardens," the woman said, her voice faltering. "The winter gardens at the Riverside Botanical Center. They were beautiful. I just kept walking. I must have, I don't know. I can't remember." She pressed a gloved hand to her forehead. "My phone, my wallet, everything." Before Tommy could respond, the diesel engine of the number 40 rumbled around the corner. The bus was a scarred beast, rust-streaked and grimy. The doors hissed open, and the driver glared down at them. His name badge read Gus. Tommy knew Gus. Everyone knew Gus. He didn't wait, didn't smile, didn't care. Let's go, Gus barked. I'm behind schedule. The woman stood shakily and approached the steps. Sir, she said, trying to maintain dignity. I seem to have lost my purse. If you could just. No pay, no ride. Gus cut her off with a harsh laugh. Read the sign, lady. The woman's face flushed. I'm not asking for charity, I'm in distress. If you could just. $3 or hit the pavement. Your choice. The cruelty hit Tommy like a punch. He watched the woman shrink, watched her step backward as if pushed. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was shock, the shock of being treated like garbage. The woman stepped back onto the curb. I see, she whispered. I apologize for the delay. Gus snorted, reaching for the door lever. Wait. Tommy's voice was louder than intended. He stepped forward, jamming his foot between the closing doors. Get your foot out of there, kid. Gus yelled. Tommy didn't move. His heart hammered as he reached into his pocket, feeling for the bills and coins. $5. His mother's medication copay. The milk money, everything. But watching this woman being cast out into a January night felt worse than an empty refrigerator. He climbed the steps and dropped the money into the fare box. The coins clattered loudly. That's for both of us, Tommy said, looking Gus in the eye. Gus stared at the money, then grunted. Whatever, sit down. Tommy turned back to the woman. He extended his hand. Come on. It's okay. The woman looked at his hand as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever seen. Her eyes glistened. She took his hand, soft, papery, cold, and let him help her up the steps. The bus lurched forward. Tommy guided her to a seat in the middle, away from the noise in back and Gus's glare up front. They sat on cracked vinyl. The bus smelled of wet wool and tired people. Outside, snow fell harder. You didn't have to do that, the woman said. That was your money. It's just money, Tommy said, though his stomach knotted thinking about dinner. My dad always says nobody should be left behind when they need help. The woman studied him. What's your name? Tommy Reed. I'm Margaret, the woman said, extending her hand. Margaret Hartley. They shook hands solemnly. Why is a 12-year-old riding the bus alone? Margaret asked softly. My mom's homesick, she has MS. Today's not a good day, so I'm heading home to make dinner and give her medicine. Margaret's expression flickered. And your father? Still working. Construction. He used to work in an office but he got laid off. Now he does whatever he can find. I see. Margaret's voice went quiet. They rode in silence, watching the landscape change as the bus descended into neighborhoods where houses pressed close together. Snow fell in earnest now, coating everything white. This is my stop, Tommy said as the bus slowed near Maple and 3rd. He gathered his bag, then looked at Margaret's pale, confused face. Where are you going? The downtown terminal, I suppose, Margaret said uncertainly. I can find a phone there. Tommy bit his lip. He knew the downtown terminal. At night it filled with danger. The thought of sending this lost woman there made his stomach clench. The bus stopped, the doors hissed open, cold air rushing in. Margaret stood to follow him off. As her feet touched the curb, she suddenly swayed, gripping the pole. Her face went pale, her breathing rapid. Ma'am. Tommy dropped his bag and grabbed her arm. Are you okay? I feel dizzy. Light-headed. Margaret pressed her hand to her chest, breathing hard. The cold, I think. I just need a moment. Tommy looked around frantically. Snow fell thick now, wind picking up. Margaret was shaking, either from cold or shock or both. The bus pulled away, leaving them on the dark street corner. My house is right there, Tommy said, pointing half a block down. Please just come inside. You need to sit down and get warm. I couldn't. Margaret started. Please, Tommy's voice was urgent. You're not okay, it's not safe. My mom's home, she'll know what to do. Please. Margaret looked at the swirling snow, felt another wave of dizziness and nodded weakly. Just for a moment. To catch my breath. Tommy took her arm and guided her slowly down the block to a narrow brick building with a crooked 414 nailed beside the door. 3 flights up, Tommy warned. But we'll go slow. They climbed together, Margaret gripping the banister, Tommy staying close. The stairwell smelled of other people's dinners. Paint peeled from the walls, each step creaked. By the second landing, Margaret was breathing hard. Tommy pretended to adjust his bag, giving her time. Almost there, he encouraged. At the third floor, Tommy jiggled the key, left, then right, then pushed hard. The door groaned open. "Mom," he called. "I'm home. I brought someone who needs help." The apartment was tiny but meticulously clean. The linoleum floor, though cracked, had been scrubbed until it shone. The walls were decorated with children's drawings in mismatched frames. It was also cold, almost as cold as outside. A woman appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning on a cane. She was younger than Margaret expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with light brown hair pulled back and warm gray eyes. When she saw Margaret, her expression immediately shifted from surprise to concern. "Oh my goodness," she said, moving forward despite the obvious pain it caused her. "Please, come in, come sit down. You look like you're about to faint." Her voice was gentle, genuinely worried, with none of the suspicion Margaret might have expected. She wore a thick robe over layers against the cold. "Mom, this is Margaret," Tommy said, helping his mother guide the elderly woman to the sofa. "She lost her purse. The bus driver was going to leave her in the snow. I paid her fare, but when we got off, she got really dizzy and almost fell." "I'm Helen Reed," the woman said, settling Margaret onto the sofa and immediately draping a thin quilt over her shoulders. "Tommy, get some water, and start the kettle for tea." "I don't want to impose," Margaret said automatically, though she was grateful to be sitting, to be out of the wind. "You're not imposing." Helen's smile was warm, genuine. "You're clearly unwell and it's freezing out there. We're not going to send you back out until you've warmed up and caught your breath." She lowered herself carefully into the armchair across from Margaret, her movements showing the disease's toll on her body. But her face was kind, open, without a trace of resentment at this unexpected intrusion. "Tommy says you lost your purse. That must be so frightening." "I went for a walk," Margaret explained, still slightly breathless. "The botanical gardens. I just kept walking, and somewhere along the way I must have set it down. I can't quite remember where." "That happens to me too," Helen said, her voice sympathetic rather than pitying. "I'll forget why I walked into a room, or where I put something. It's unsettling." Margaret looked at this woman, clearly struggling with her own health issues, living in obvious poverty, offering understanding and kindness without hesitation. "You're very kind. Kindness doesn't cost anything," Helen said, simply, "and my son clearly thought you needed help, so here you are. We're glad to have you." Tommy brought a glass of water and set the old kettle on the stove. As it began to heat, Helen asked gentle questions about Margaret's walk, about the gardens, keeping her talking, keeping her calm. Margaret found herself relaxing, responding to Helen's natural warmth. The witch hazel was blooming, Margaret said, yellow flowers against gray bark. It was beautiful. "I used to take Tommy to those gardens when he was little," Helen said, her face lighting up with the memory. "Before I got too sick to walk that far. The winter garden really is special." They talked easily, two women who might have come from different worlds but who found common ground in simple conversation. Helen asked nothing intrusive, made no judgments, simply offered the comfort of human connection. Tommy brought the tea in chipped mugs, chamomile, apologizing that it was all they had. Margaret wrapped her hands around the warmth, feeling her heart rate slow, the dizziness fade. "You have a wonderful son," Margaret said. "What he did on that bus, giving up his own money to help a stranger, that's extraordinary." Helen's eyes grew bright. "He has a good heart. His father and I try to teach him that people matter more than things. That you help when you can. You've taught him well." As they talked, Margaret's observant eyes began to notice the details Helen's warmth and conversation had initially distracted her from. The near-empty refrigerator visible through the partially open door, the stack of bills on the table, one marked final notice in red, the pill organizer, the blood pressure monitor, the cold radiator beneath the window, clearly broken. The blankets rolled against the window frame to block drafts, but she also noticed the fierce pride in how everything was maintained. The spotless floor, The carefully mended curtains, the drawings on the wall arranged with the precision of a gallery. This family had almost nothing, yet they'd invited her in without hesitation, offered her their warmth and their time and their genuine care. As Margaret was beginning to feel almost normal again, an old radio on the kitchen counter crackled to life. Helen must have turned it on while making the tea. A tinny voice cut through the static, repeating our top story: the National Weather Service has just upgraded the winter storm warning to a blizzard warning for the metro area, effective 8 p.m. tonight, through 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. 8 to 12 inches of heavy snow expected with winds gusting up to 45 miles per hour. Whiteout conditions likely. Residents are strongly advised to avoid all travel. Stay off the roads unless absolutely. The door opened with a gust of cold air and snow. A man stepped inside, tall and lean, shaking snow from his coat. He had kind eyes that went wide when he saw Margaret sitting on his sofa. "Helen, Tommy." His voice carried concern and confusion. "What's going on?" Robert. Helen's face brightened. "Come in, close the door. This is Margaret. She needed help." Tommy jumped up. "Dad, Margaret lost her purse. The bus driver was mean to her, so I paid her fare. Then she got dizzy when we got off the bus, so I brought her here. And now there's a blizzard coming." Robert looked from his son to his wife to the elderly woman wrapped in their quilt. His eyes went to the window where snow was now pelting the glass, driven by increasing wind. He looked back at Margaret, taking in her expensive coat, her obvious age and vulnerability. He moved to the window, peering out at the deteriorating conditions. The street was already disappearing under white. He turned back, his decision made. "Ma'am, I'm Robert Reed," he said, extending a work-roughened hand. "Tommy's father. And I'm very glad he found you, because nobody should be out in what's coming." Margaret shook his hand. "I'm Margaret Hartley. Your son was very kind." Robert smiled. He gets that from his mother. He looked at Helen, and some wordless communication passed between them. Then he turned back to Margaret, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Hartley, I don't know how you were planning to get home, but with this blizzard, it's not safe for anyone to be traveling. The roads are going to be impassable within the hour." "I was going to call for a car," Margaret started. "No car service is going to come out in this," Robert said, not unkindly. "And even if they did, it wouldn't be safe. We'd like you to stay here tonight. Wait out the storm. In the morning when it's clear, you can call whoever you need to call. I couldn't possibly impose on your family." "You're not imposing," Helen said firmly, her warmth now backed by determination. "We have a bed, we have a roof that doesn't leak, and we're not going to send you out into a blizzard. That's final." Margaret looked at their faces. Tommy's earnest concern, Helen's warm insistence, Robert's quiet certainty. These people who had so little were offering her everything they had without a moment's hesitation. "Then I should at least call my son," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. "Let him know I'm safe. May I use your phone?" "Of course," Helen said, gesturing to the old rotary phone on the wall. Margaret moved to the phone with Helen's help, her fingers still trembling slightly, as she dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang twice. "Mother?" William's voice was frantic. "Where are you? I've been calling everywhere. Your assistant said you went for a walk hours ago and never came back. I was about to send out a search." "William, stop. I'm fine. I'm safe." Margaret's voice was calm, soothing. "I went to the botanical gardens and got a bit turned around. A kind family helped me. I'm staying with them tonight, because of the storm." "What family? Where are you?" "I'll send a car immediately." "You'll do no such thing. There's a blizzard warning, William. The roads aren't safe. I'm warm, I'm fed, and these people have been nothing but generous. I'll call you in the morning when it's clear." "Mother, I need to know where you are. I need to make sure you're actually safe." "I'm at..." Margaret looked at Helen, who quietly provided the address. 414 Maple Street, Apartment 3B, the Reed family. "They've taken excellent care of me." "The Reed family," William repeated, and Margaret could hear him writing it down. "Mother, at least let me, William." Her voice took on the tone that had raised a CEO and wouldn't be argued with. "I am 74 years old, not a child. I am safe. I will call you in the morning. Do not try to come here tonight. The roads are dangerous. Promise me. A long pause. I promise. But first light, mother. I'm coming first light. When it's safe. Margaret corrected. I'll see you in the morning, dear. Don't worry. She hung up and turned to find the Reed family giving her space, pretending not to have heard, but she could see the tension in Robert's shoulders, the worry in Helen's eyes. He won't come tonight, Margaret assured them. He's protective, but he's not foolish. You must have been very frightened, Helen said softly. Being lost like that. I was, Margaret admitted. And then your son appeared. My guardian angel on a bus. Tommy ducked his head, embarrassed, but Margaret saw the small smile on his face. Well, Robert said, clapping his hands together. If we're all staying in tonight, we should have dinner. Tommy, check what we have. Tommy opened the refrigerator, and Margaret watched him inventory the sparse contents. 6 eggs, a half-gallon of milk, a small block of cheese, some wilted lettuce. His young face showed no disappointment, just practical assessment. Scrambled eggs, he announced. And toast if we have bread. We have bread, Helen confirmed from her chair. And a little butter. Tommy moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, cracking eggs into a bowl, whisking them carefully. Margaret noticed how he used every drop, scraping the bowl clean, wasting nothing. He found a pan that had been scrubbed until its scratched surface shone, heated it carefully. Robert had gone to the window again, watching the storm intensify. It's really coming down now, he said. We made the right call. He moved to check the radiator, his hand confirming what Margaret had already suspected. It was stone cold. He frowned, then went to the oven. Heat's been out since Tuesday, he explained to Margaret. Landlord keeps promising to fix it. I'm going to use the oven for warmth tonight. It's not ideal, but it's what we have. Is that safe? Margaret asked, concerned. If we're careful. We'll crack a window for ventilation, keep the bedroom door closed. We've done it before. His smile was tired but genuine. We're resourceful. Margaret watched Robert move around the small kitchen, and something in his movements caught her attention. The way he held himself, straight back despite exhaustion, methodical despite the chaos his life had become. There was a quiet dignity in how he opened the oven, adjusted the temperature, cracked the window just enough. A man who'd learned to make do with what he had, to protect his family with whatever tools were available. She thought of Arthur, of the young Marine who'd come home from Vietnam with nightmares and determination, who'd refused to let the war destroy him, who'd built a life through sheer force of will and stubborn decency. Tommy made toast on the stovetop, flipping the bread with a fork until it was golden. He set the table with mismatched plates, one with a chip, one slightly cracked, one that had been someone's souvenir from somewhere. Forks from different sets, paper napkins folded neatly. Dinner's ready, he announced. They gathered around the small table. Margaret noticed immediately that she'd been given the largest portion of eggs. Helen and Tommy had divided what remained into 2 small servings that wouldn't satisfy a child's hunger, let alone adults who'd worked all day. Please, Margaret said, pushing her plate toward the center. This is far too much. I can't possibly. You can and you will. Helen said, her voice gentle but unyielding, her smile taking any sting from the command. You've had a terrible shock today. You need to eat. We're fine. But you barely have anything. We have enough, Robert said firmly. And we're not going to watch a guest go hungry. Please, eat. Margaret looked at their faces, all smiling, all insistent, all genuinely wanting her to take what they'd offered. She felt her throat tighten with emotion. You're very kind, she whispered. They ate together, this unlikely group brought together by chance and kindness. The food was simple, eggs slightly overdone, toast a bit dry, but it was the most meaningful meal Margaret had eaten in years because it was offered with such genuine care. As they ate, Robert asked Margaret polite questions about her walk, about the gardens, carefully avoiding anything too personal. Helen shared stories about Tommy's school, about the neighborhood, painting a picture of their life with warmth and humor despite its hardships. Margaret found herself watching this family with growing fascination. The way Helen and Robert communicated with glances and small gestures, the kind of shorthand that came from years of partnership, tested by hardship. The way Tommy anticipated his mother's needs before she asked, getting up to refill her water, adjusting the cushion behind her back. The way Robert's hand would rest briefly on Helen's shoulder when he passed, a touch that said, "I'm here, we're okay, we'll make it through." "Tell me about your family," Helen said gently as they finished eating. "Your son must have been worried sick." "William," Margaret said. "My son William, he's very protective, perhaps overprotective at times." She smiled. "My husband passed away 5 years ago, Arthur Hartley. He was a good man." "I'm sorry for your loss," Helen said with genuine sympathy. 5 years isn't very long. "No," Margaret agreed, "though in some ways it feels like yesterday, and in others like a lifetime ago. He was my partner in everything, in marriage, in business, in life. We built our company together from nothing. Sometimes I still turn to tell him something before I remember he's gone." "That's how love works," Robert said quietly. "The people who matter most never really leave us." Something in his tone made Margaret look at him more closely. She saw the grief in his eyes, old but still present, and understood without being told that he'd lost someone too. After dinner, Helen insisted on cleaning up despite Margaret's offers to help. "You're still recovering," she said firmly. "Sit, rest." So Margaret sat on the worn sofa while Tommy dried dishes and Robert prepared the apartment for the night ahead. She watched them work together, this family that had so little but seemed to have everything that truly mattered. The wind howled outside. The building creaked and groaned. But inside, warmed by the open oven and something less tangible, Margaret felt safer than she had in months. 3 loud knocks suddenly boomed on the door, aggressive and demanding. The warmth in the room evaporated instantly. Helen's face went pale. Robert's jaw tightened. Tommy froze, his young face showing fear he usually tried to hide. Robert moved to the door and opened it just a crack, his body blocking the entrance. A large man filled the doorway, wearing a stained canvas jacket and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into his fleshy features. His small eyes glittered with malice as he looked past Robert into the apartment. "Read." His voice was rough, used to intimidation. "We need to talk about rent. Mr. Vickers." Robert kept his voice neutral, but Margaret could hear the tension underneath. "This isn't a good time. There's a blizzard. Rent was due Friday." Vickers pushed against the door, forcing Robert to either give way or engage in a physical confrontation. Robert stepped back, letting the man enter. "You're 5 days late again." Margaret saw Robert's hands clench at his sides, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, but his voice remained steady, controlled. "I explained when I called Tuesday, my paycheck was short because of the snow days last week. I'll have the full amount by Wednesday. I already talked to my foreman about picking up extra hours this weekend. Wednesday ain't good enough." Vickers pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and slapped it against the wall with his meaty hand, leaving a smudge. 3-day notice. You pay by Thursday at noon or you're out, all of you." Helen made a small sound, quickly stifled. Margaret saw her grip the arm of her chair, knuckles white. Tommy had gone very still, his face carefully blank in the way children learn when they don't want adults to see how scared they are. "Please," Robert said, and the desperation in his voice cut through Margaret like a knife. "Mr. Vickers, we have a child. My wife is sick, just give us until Friday. 1 more week. I swear to you we'll have it. That's what you said last month. And the month before that." Vickers' eyes swept the apartment with disdain, landing on Margaret sitting at the table. "You got money for guests? You got money to feed strangers, but you can't pay me my rent." "She's not. She just needed help." Robert started, and Margaret heard something crack in his voice. Not just desperation now, but shame. The shame of a man who couldn't protect his family, who'd been reduced to begging a bully for mercy. "I don't care what she needed." Vickers jabbed a thick finger toward the notice on the wall. "Thursday at noon, cash. Or the sheriff helps you pack. Your choice." He turned and stomped toward the door, then paused, looking back at the family with contempt. "And you better not be thinking about hiding anything when you go. I know every stick of furniture in this dump. It's all mine until you're paid up." He slammed the door hard enough to make the dishes rattle in the drainer. Silence fell like a weight. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the old building creaking under the storm's assault. Robert stood by the door, one hand braced against the frame, his head bowed, shoulders slumped. Margaret could see him trembling, whether from rage or despair or both she couldn't tell. Helen sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. Her hands gripped her cane so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was staring at the eviction notice on the wall as if it were a death sentence. Because it was, Margaret realized. For a woman with MS, with no money, with a child to care for, eviction wasn't just losing a home. It was losing everything. Stability, medical care. The fragile structure that kept her world from collapsing completely. Tommy had gone to his mother, wrapping his thin arms around her, his face buried in her robe. His shoulders shook. He was crying silently, the way children cry when they've learned that making noise only makes things worse. Margaret sat very still, looking at the eviction notice on the wall. Looking at this family, who'd shared their last meal with her, who'd given her their warmth and their kindness without hesitation, now facing homelessness in 3 days. She touched her coat pocket, the habitual gesture of someone reaching for a checkbook that had always been there to solve problems. Empty. Her purse was gone. Her phone, her wallet, her credit cards, her identification, her power to fix things with a stroke of a pen. All gone. For this moment, she was as powerless as they were. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "That man is cruel." Robert turned from the door, his face composed now but his eyes red. "It's not your fault, Mrs. Hartley. This is just," his voice caught. "This is our life. We'll figure something out. We always do." But there was no conviction in his words, only exhaustion and defeat. Helen wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, straightening in her chair with visible effort. "We should get you settled for the night," she said to Margaret, her voice hoarse but determinedly cheerful. "You need rest after the day you've had." "Helen, please," Margaret started. "The bedroom is small but the bed is comfortable," Helen continued, as if Margaret hadn't spoken, as if her world wasn't ending in 3 days, as if she could keep everything together through sheer force of gracious hospitality. "I put fresh sheets on this morning. You'll sleep well." Margaret recognized the desperate need to maintain normalcy, to hold on to dignity when everything else was slipping away. So she let Helen show her to the bedroom, accepted the nightgown that smelled of lavender detergent, allowed herself to be tucked in like a child. "Thank you," she whispered as Helen turned to leave. "For everything. You didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Helen said simply. "It's what you do. You help people. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Her smile was sad but genuine. "My husband's father taught him that. You never leave people behind. Not if you can help it." She closed the door softly behind her. Margaret lay in the narrow bed, surrounded by the modest possessions of this family. A photograph on the nightstand showed younger, healthier versions of Robert and Helen, and a gap-toothed Tommy, all smiling before life had ground them down. Books on a shelf, library books, science books for Tommy. A small ceramic bird, carefully dusted. And there on the dresser, a frame she hadn't noticed before. She rose and moved closer, squinting in the dim light from the street lamp outside. The photograph was old, the edges soft with age and handling. 2 young men in muddy combat uniforms stood with their arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera despite the exhaustion and fear etched into their young faces. Behind them, smoke rose from destroyed buildings. They looked impossibly young, impossibly alive. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. One of the men looked remarkably like Robert, the same strong jaw, the same kind eyes. The other had pale blue eyes she would have recognized anywhere. Her hand flew to her mouth. It couldn't be, it was impossible. She moved closer, her hands trembling as she lifted the frame. On the back, written in faded ink, "Dad and Arthur Hartley, Hugh, Vietnam, 1968, brothers who made it home." Arthur, her Arthur. Margaret sank onto the bed, the photograph clutched in her shaking hands, staring at her husband's young face. Arthur at 19, before the gray hair and the business suits and the years that had carved lines around his eyes. Arthur in the war he'd rarely spoken about, standing beside a soldier whose name she knew, whose story she knew, whose sacrifice had given her everything. William Reed, Sergeant William Reed, who'd gone back into a burning building when everyone else had retreated, who'd pulled Arthur from the rubble with his bare hands, who'd carried him 2 miles through enemy fire to the medic station, who'd saved Arthur's life, and in doing so had given Margaret her husband, had given their son his father, had given their family its entire future. Through the thin walls she could hear everything. The wind screaming, the building creaking, the oven running with its door open, and voices, quiet but not quiet enough. "We gave her the last of the food," Helen whispered, her voice thick with tears. "We gave her our last eggs, Robert. What do we eat tomorrow?" "I know." Robert's voice was hollow. "It was the right thing to do. Dad would have done the same." "Your father." Helen's laugh was bitter, broken. "Your father who taught you to never leave anyone behind. And now we're being left behind. Now we're the ones nobody's helping. Helen, I can't do this anymore." Her voice broke into sobs. "I can't watch our son go hungry. I can't watch you kill yourself working double shifts that still aren't enough. I can't pack up our lives again, find another place that'll take us when we have no deposit, no references, when landlords see my cane and your hands and Tommy's thin jacket, and they know we're desperate. We'll figure it out." But Robert sounded as broken as his wife. "We always figure it out." "How? How do we figure this out, Robert? We're 3 days from being on the street. 3 days, and I can barely walk. And Tommy," her voice dissolved into weeping. "I'll pick up more hours. I'll talk to Mike again, see if there's overtime." "Your back can't take it, doctor." Chen said, "If you keep pushing like this, you'll need surgery. We can't afford." "Then my back breaks. At least we'll have a roof." A long terrible silence. Then Tommy's young voice, small and scared. "I can quit school. Get a job. I'm almost 13. I can." "No." Robert's voice was sharp, fierce. "No. You stay in school, you get your education, you have a future, Tommy. You're going to have opportunities we never had. You're going to be something. This isn't on you." "But Dad," I said. "No, this is on me. I'm the father. I'm supposed to provide. I'm supposed to protect you. And his voice cracked completely. "I'm failing. God help me. I'm failing my family." Helen was crying. Tommy was crying. And Robert made a sound Margaret had heard only a few times in her life. The sound of a man breaking, of someone who'd held everything together through sheer will finally collapsing under the weight. Margaret sat on the bed in the darkness, the photograph of her young husband and his savior in her hands, listening to the family of William Reed fall apart in the next room. The family of the man who'd given her everything. The family who'd shared their last meal with a stranger. The family who were about to lose everything, while she lived in a mansion with more rooms than she could use, more money than she could spend, more of everything that didn't matter, and not enough of what did. She looked down at Arthur's young face in the photograph, at the smile he'd worn before the war had taught him what darkness looked like, at the arms slung around William Reed's shoulders, the posture of brothers forged in fire. "We owe them," she whispered to her dead husband. "We owe them everything. And I'm going to make sure they know it." She rose, straightened her borrowed nightgown, and moved quietly to the door. The voices had fallen silent, now replaced by muffled sobs and the creaking of the old sofa as people settled into uncomfortable sleep. Margaret made her way through the dark apartment to the rotary phone on the wall. She dialed William's private number, the one he'd given her years ago for emergencies. He answered on the first ring. "Mother, William, I need you to listen very carefully," she said, her voice low but steady. "I need you to listen and not interrupt." "I'm listening." "The family who took me in tonight, their last name is Reed, the father's name is Robert, and William." She paused, looking at the eviction notice still stuck to the wall. "His father's name was William Reed too. Sergeant William Reed, 101st Airborne." Silence. Complete, absolute silence. Then very quietly, "Mother, you don't mean, I mean exactly what you think I mean. I'm looking at a photograph right now, your father and William Reed taken in Vietnam, in 1968, 2 days after William Reed pulled your father out of a burning building and carried him 2 miles through enemy fire." She heard her son's breath catch, heard the scrape of a chair as he sat down hard. "These people," Margaret continued, her voice fierce now, "the family of the man who saved your father's life, who gave you your father, who gave me my husband, they just shared their last food with me. They're facing eviction in 3 days. They have nothing, William. And they gave me everything they had. Where are you? William's voice was rough with emotion. Give me the address again. I'm coming. No, not tonight. There's a blizzard. The roads aren't safe. I don't care about the roads. I do. And they would. These are people who've lost enough. William, I won't have you risking someone's life to get here 5 hours earlier. You'll come in the morning, when it's safe, when the roads are clear. Mother and William, her voice softened. Bring the photograph, the one from your father's desk. The one he looked at every day for 42 years. Bring it. They should know he never forgot, that he always wondered, that he always hoped William Reed made it home safe. He didn't, did he? William's voice was almost a whisper. He made it home, but life wasn't kind. No, life wasn't kind. His son is working construction after being wrongfully fired from a job he loved. His daughter-in-law has MS. His grandson wears his dog tags to school and gives his last $5 to help strangers because that's what his grandfather taught him. They remember him, William. They honor him. And they're about to be evicted. Not anymore, they're not. No, Margaret agreed. Not anymore. But William, when you come tomorrow, you come humble, you come grateful. You don't come as a CEO fixing a problem. You come as the son of a man whose life was saved. Do you understand? I understand. Do you? Do you really? Margaret looked at the eviction notice, at the closed bedroom door behind which a family wept. Because this isn't charity, William. This isn't philanthropy. This is payment of a debt 50 years overdue. This is honoring what our family owes theirs. I know, Mother. I swear to you I know. Margaret closed her eyes, leaning against the wall. I found the photograph. In their bedroom. Your father and William Reed, arms around each other, smiling despite everything. They look so young, William. Just boys, really. Boys who saved each other, and then lost touch, and never knew. Her voice broke. Tomorrow, William said, his own voice thick. I'll be there at first light. And Mother, thank you, for finding them, for giving us this chance. I didn't find them, William. A 12-year-old boy with $5 and his grandfather's courage found me. Remember that. She hung up and stood in the darkness for a long moment, letting the enormity of it all wash over her. Then she returned to the bedroom, climbed back into bed, and pulled the thin blanket close. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow everything changes. She looked one more time at the photograph on the dresser, at Arthur and William Reed, brothers forged in war, connected across decades by sacrifice and honor. We found them, my love, she whispered. We finally found them. And we're going to make this right. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Margaret Hartley closed her eyes and slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that morning would bring justice, gratitude, and the settling of accounts that transcended money or power. Morning would bring family recognizing family. Morning would bring the debt repaid. Margaret woke to gray light, filtering through thin curtains, and the sound of shovels scraping concrete somewhere below. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed, buried under pristine white, that made even this shabby street look almost beautiful, almost hopeful. She rose and dressed in yesterday's clothes, smoothed her hair, as best she could without a mirror, and emerged from the bedroom, to find Tommy already awake. He sat at the kitchen table, with a textbook open, doing homework in the dim morning light. The dog tags hung outside his shirt now, resting against his chest, catching the pale winter sun. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was tired but genuine. Good morning, Mrs. Hartley. Good morning, Tommy. Mom and Dad went down to help dig out the building entrance, he explained, closing his textbook. Mr. Kapoor on the first floor has a bad hip, so Dad always helps him after storms. And Mrs. Chen is 92, so, he shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to help neighbors when your own world was ending in 3 days. Margaret felt her throat tighten. That's very kind of your father. He says that's what his dad would have done. Tommy's hand went unconsciously to the dog tags. Grandpa Reed. He was in the war, Vietnam. He saved people. Did he? Margaret moved closer, her heart beginning to pound. What do you know about that? Not as much as I'd like. Tommy's young face showed a maturity beyond his years, the kind that came from growing up too fast, from learning too early that the world wasn't fair, and heroes didn't always get happy endings. Grandpa died when I was little, heart attack. But Dad told me stories about how Grandpa got the Silver Star for going back into a burning building to save another soldier when everyone else had retreated. How he carried the guy 2 miles through enemy fire. He touched the dog tags with reverent fingers. Dad gave me these on my 10th birthday. Said I was old enough to understand what they meant, what it means to not leave people behind. Margaret's vision blurred with tears she was trying to hold back. Your grandfather sounds like he was an extraordinary man. He was. Tommy's smile was sad and proud at once. Dad says I remind him of Grandpa sometimes, when I help people. He says the legacy doesn't die if you keep it alive. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Robert and Helen's return. They appeared in the doorway, stamping snow from their boots, and froze when they saw Margaret standing in their kitchen. For a moment no one spoke. Then Helen moved forward with her careful cane-assisted walk, her face showing exhaustion, and something else, the determined cheerfulness of someone who'd cried all night, and was now armoring herself with politeness. Mrs. Hartley, I hope you slept well. Her voice was warm, but Margaret could hear the brittleness underneath, the fragility of someone holding themselves together through force of will. I did, thank you. Better than I have in months. Margaret looked at them both, at Robert's red-rimmed eyes that he was trying to hide, at Helen's swollen face that makeup couldn't quite conceal, at the way they both stood a little too straight, a little too composed, like soldiers before battle. I heard Mr. Vickers last night. I'm so very sorry. Robert's jaw tightened. That's not your concern, Mrs. Hartley. You have enough to worry about. Please call me Margaret. Margaret then. He managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Your son must be worried. You should call him, let him know the roads are clearing. Before Margaret could respond, a sound from outside made them all turn to the window. The deep, powerful rumble of expensive engines, the kind of sound that didn't belong in this neighborhood. Tommy got to the window first. His eyes went wide. Whoa! Margaret joined him, and looked down at the street below. Her heart began to race. Parked at the curb, impossibly out of place among the beat-up sedans and rusty pickup trucks, sat a convoy of vehicles that looked like they'd driven straight out of a different world. 3 massive black SUVs with tinted windows, their sleek lines and polished chrome absurdly pristine against the dirty snow, and in the center, a long black limousine with small flags on the fenders. People had come out of the nearby buildings to stare. Neighbors stood on their stoops in winter coats, pointing and whispering. Mr. Kapoor was leaning heavily on his cane, mouth agape. Mrs. Chen had her face pressed against her first-floor window. Robert and Helen stood behind Tommy and Margaret, looking at the convoy with expressions that had gone from confusion to something close to fear. Margaret, Robert said slowly, who exactly is your son? Before she could answer, the limousine's rear door opened. A man stepped out, who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine. Tall late 40s or early 50s, with steel gray hair, perfectly cut, wearing a cashmere overcoat, over what was clearly a suit that cost more than the Reed family's annual rent. But it was his face that caught Margaret's attention, the sharp intelligent features, the pale blue eyes so like her own, the expression of controlled intensity that she recognized from her own mirror. William. Her son moved with crisp efficiency, flanked by 3 men who were obviously security personnel. Large, alert, wearing earpieces and expressions that said they'd handled everything from corporate espionage to actual espionage, and could deal with whatever came next. But William carried something in his hands, a leather briefcase in one hand, and in the other, wrapped carefully in cloth, a silver picture frame. That's your son, Tommy whispered, still staring out the window. That's my son. Robert had gone very pale. The William Hartley, CEO of Hartley Enterprises. Margaret turned to look at him. You know the company. I used to work for one of their subsidiaries, Miller and Associates. Before his voice went flat. Before my manager stole my work and got me fired. 3 sharp knocks on the door. Professional, controlled, nothing like Vickers's aggressive pounding. Tommy opened it to reveal one of the security men, 6.5 feet of solid muscle in expensive suit, with an earpiece, and the kind of vigilant eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Margaret Hartley. His voice was surprisingly gentle for such a large man. That's me. Your son is here to see you, ma'am. May we come in? The we turned out to be all three security personnel, who efficiently swept the small apartment with their eyes, assessing exits and threats with professional speed. And then William stepped through the door. He was in full CEO mode, Margaret could tell immediately. Controlled, composed, his expression giving nothing away. His pale blue eyes found her first, and she saw the relief flash across his face before the professional mask returned. Mother, his voice was measured, formal. Are you well? You weren't injured? I'm perfectly fine, William. I've been in excellent care. William's gaze moved to the Reed family, who stood clustered by the window looking like they'd stumbled into someone else's life. His eyes traveled over the apartment, taking in the poverty, the careful cleanliness, the bone-deep cold despite the oven running, the eviction notice still taped to the wall. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then his gaze landed on Tommy, on the dog tags hanging visibly at the boy's collar. William went completely still. Margaret watched her son stare at those tags, watched his face lose all color, watched his carefully controlled expression crack just slightly at the edges. You must be Thomas Reed, William said, his voice still formal but with something underneath now, something that sounded like barely restrained emotion. Yes, sir, most people call me Tommy. William moved closer, his eyes never leaving the dog tags. Those are military tags. Yes, sir, they were my grandfather's. He gave them to my dad, and my dad gave them to me. May I? William's voice caught slightly. He cleared his throat. May I see them? Tommy looked uncertain, glancing at his parents. Helen nodded, her face confused and worried. Tommy carefully lifted the chain over his head and held the tags out. William took them with hands that trembled visibly despite his controlled expression. He held them up to the light from the window, and Margaret saw his throat work as he read the stamped letters. Reed, William J., Sergeant 101st Airborne OPAS. William's breath caught audibly. He closed his eyes, his hand closing around the tags so tightly his knuckles went white. William? Robert took a step forward, his voice uncertain. What's wrong? William opened his eyes. When he looked at Robert, his professional mask had shattered completely. His face showed naked emotion, shock and grief, and something that looked like desperate hope. Your father, William said, his voice rough. What was your father's full name? William James Reed. Why? William set his briefcase down with shaking hands and opened it. From inside he pulled out the cloth-wrapped frame. His fingers fumbled with the wrapping. William Hartley, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, whose hands never shook in boardrooms filled with sharks, couldn't unwrap a picture frame without trembling. Margaret moved to help him, gently taking the cloth and folding it aside. The frame was silver, expensive but understated. And inside, Robert made a sound like he'd been punched. Helen's hand flew to her mouth. Tommy stared, his young face struggling to process what he was seeing. The photograph was identical to the one Margaret had seen last night in the bedroom. Two young soldiers in muddy combat uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera despite exhaustion and devastation behind them. Impossibly young, impossibly alive. One was unmistakably a young Robert, the same strong jaw, the same kind eyes, the same bearing. The other was Arthur, Margaret's Arthur, at 19, before the gray hair and the business and the years. Where did you get that? Robert's voice was barely a whisper, his face sheet white. That's my father. That's how do you have that photograph? William was still holding Tommy's dog tags in one hand, the photograph in the other, and tears were streaming down his face now, no attempt to hide them, no CEO composure left. My father kept this on his desk for 42 years, William said, his voice breaking. Arthur Hartley. That's my father. He pointed to the young man standing next to Robert's father. This was taken in Vietnam in 1968, 48 hours after the Battle of Hue. After your father saved my father's life. The room went completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator, and the wind outside, and someone's broken breathing. Saved his life. Robert repeated, like the words didn't make sense, like he was trying to translate them from a foreign language. Margaret stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. Robert, your father went back into a burning building when everyone else had retreated. He pulled a 19-year-old private named Arthur Hartley out of the rubble, carried him 2 miles through enemy fire to the medic station, took a bullet to the shoulder doing it. She gestured to the photograph. Look closely, you can see the bandage. Robert moved closer, his hand shaking as he touched the glass over his father's image. There it was, barely visible beneath the torn uniform, white gauze wrapped around William Reed's left shoulder. The Silver Star, Robert whispered. Dad got the Silver Star for saving someone at Hugh. He never told us the name. He never told us the name. His voice broke. He just said there was a kid trapped, and someone had to go back. Someone had to help him. That kid was my father. William's voice was thick with tears he was no longer trying to hide. That kid became my father. Married my mother, built a company, had me, had grandchildren, lived 42 more years. None of it would have existed without Sergeant William Reed. He held up the dog tags again, his hand trembling. And yesterday his grandson gave his last $5 to help a stranger on a bus, brought her to safety, shared his family's last meal with her. William turned to Tommy, and the boy took an instinctive step back from the intensity in the man's face. Hugh saved my mother, William said, his voice fierce. Just like your grandfather saved my father. The legacy didn't die, it's standing right here. Helen had sunk into the nearest chair, tears streaming down her face, her cane clattering to the floor. Robert stood frozen by the photograph, one hand pressed over his mouth, his shoulders shaking. Tommy looked from the photograph to the dog tags to William to his father, his young face showing the struggle to comprehend the enormity of what was unfolding. Grandpa knew your dad, he finally managed. Grandpa saved him, yes. William knelt so he was at eye level with the boy, carefully placing the dog tags back around Tommy's neck. Your grandfather gave my father back to me before I was even born. He gave my mother her husband. He gave our family its entire future. Everything we are, everything we have, exists because Sergeant William Reed went back into that burning building. He looked up at Robert, still kneeling, this powerful CEO on his knees in a shabby apartment. My father tried to find yours after the war. He searched for years, different bases, different deployments, lost addresses. Dad said your father told him at the hospital, before they were separated, that he was going home to a small town, starting over, wanted to leave the war behind completely. Robert nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. That sounds like Dad. He never talked about the war except to family. Refused to join veteran groups, wouldn't go to reunions. Mom said he had nightmares for years. The quieter his life, the better he slept. By the time we had real resources to search properly, investigators, databases, it had been decades, William continued, standing now. We found hundreds of William Reeds, we sent letters, made calls, but your father had passed away by then, and without knowing he'd stayed in this area, without some detail beyond a common name. He gestured helplessly, we never found the right one. My father died 5 years ago, never knowing if Sergeant Reed made it home safe, if he had a good life, if the man who saved him survived the war he'd fought so hard to win. He did survive, Robert said, his voice thick. He came home, married my mother, worked construction his whole life, raised me. He died 15 years ago, heart attack, too young, but he had a good life, a quiet life, the life he wanted. Did he ever talk about that day? William asked. About the Battle of Hugh. Only once. Robert's eyes grew distant with memory. I was 16. It was right after he got the diagnosis, the heart condition that would kill him 6 months later. He knew time was short. He sat me down and told me the whole story. Said there was a building on fire, structure unstable, could have come down any second. Everyone else had pulled back under orders, enemy closing in. But he heard someone screaming in the rubble, so he went back in alone, dug through burning debris with his bare hands until he found a private trapped under a beam. Robert's voice dropped to almost a whisper. He said the kid's legs were crushed, said he had to lift the beam just enough to pull him out. Then he carried him 2 miles through enemy territory, got shot doing it. He showed me the scar, this puckered mark on his shoulder. Said the medics told him the private wouldn't have lasted another 15 minutes. Arthur, Margaret said softly. The private was Arthur, and at the end Robert continued, tears streaming down his face now. Dad looked at me, and he said, Robert, you listen to me. You don't leave people behind, not when they're hurting, not when they need help. I don't care what it costs you, your time, your money, your comfort, you never leave people behind. That's the only rule that matters. He laughed, a broken sound, and I tried to teach Tommy the same thing, that people matter, that you help when you can. And last night when Vickers came, his voice cracked. Last night I felt like I'd failed, Dad's only rule, failed to protect my family, failed to. You didn't fail. William's voice cut through Robert's spiraling guilt like a knife. You're facing eviction in 3 days because you were wrongfully terminated by a man who stole your work. Your wife has a chronic illness that would bankrupt most families, and in the middle of all that, you and your son still helped a stranger, still shared your last meal, still lived the legacy your father gave you. He pulled out his phone. And now we're going to make sure you never have to choose between helping people and protecting your family again. William made a call, his voice shifting into CEO mode, crisp, commanding, brooking no argument. Patterson. William Hartley, I need you to start acquisition proceedings on the building at 414 Maple Street. Full market analysis, tenant rights review, legal compliance check. I want a preliminary report by end of business today and a purchase offer ready by Friday. Priority acquisition. He paused, listening, his face hardening. I don't care what it costs. And start a comprehensive file on the current owner, Donald Vickers. I want everything, business practices, code violations, tenant complaints, financial records. If he's been breaking laws, I want documentation for the appropriate authorities. He ended the call and looked at Robert. This won't happen overnight. Real estate transactions take time. Due diligence, inspections, legal review, but I'm putting every resource I have on this. Within 2 weeks the Hartley Foundation will own this building. You have my word. Mr. Hartley, we can't let you. Robert started. You can and you will. William interrupted, his voice firm. And it's not charity, it's a debt payment 50 years overdue. He made another call. Jennifer. William Hartley, I need a full investigation into Gregory Walsh at Miller & Associates, intellectual property theft, fraud, wrongful termination. I want our legal team on this today, full documentation. Walsh is to be placed on administrative leave immediately pending investigation results. He listened briefly. No, I don't care if it's complicated. Make it happen. By the end of this week I want him gone and I want Robert Reed's personnel file cleared of all false performance allegations. Full exoneration, written apology, whatever it takes. He ended the call and turned to Robert, who was staring at him with something close to shock. You're investigating Walsh. Robert's voice was barely audible. Gregory Walsh stole your work, presented it as his own, and got you fired to cover his tracks. I had my team pull the files overnight. Your predictive algorithm for inventory optimization, the one that supposedly got you terminated for poor performance. Walsh presented it as his own creation. It saved Miller & Associates, my subsidiary, $1.7 million. Walsh got a $50,000 bonus and a promotion. William's voice went cold. As of this morning, he's under investigation. By the end of this week he'll be terminated for cause, and he'll find it quite difficult to find employment elsewhere in this industry. Robert sank into a chair, his face in his hands. I don't understand. This is too much. We just helped your mother. That's what anyone would do. No, Margaret said gently, moving to stand beside her son. It's not what anyone would do. Most people would have walked past me at that bus stop. Most people wouldn't have shared their last meal. Most people wouldn't have welcomed a stranger into their home when they're facing eviction. You did all of that because your father taught you that people matter, and now we're honoring what our family owes yours. William reached into his briefcase again, and pulled out a leather folder. I don't offer employment out of charity, Robert. I offer it because I require competent people. According to your file, you're competent, more than competent. He opened the folder with precise movements. Director of Analytics at Hartley Enterprises, $120,000 annually. Full benefits including premium health coverage, stock options, 4 weeks paid vacation, relocation assistance. You'll start in 3 weeks, that gives you time to get settled and for background checks to clear properly. My assistant will contact you next week with details. Robert stared at the folder as if it might vanish. I don't know if I'm qualified. I've read your work, all of it, not just what Walsh stole, everything you produced at Miller and Associates. You're qualified. The question is whether you're willing to accept. Robert looked at Helen, who was crying silently, her hands pressed to her mouth. He looked at Tommy, who was staring with wide eyes, his hand on the dog tags. He looked back at William, this powerful man who'd appeared out of nowhere to turn their world upside down. Yes, Robert whispered. Yes, sir. Thank you. Don't thank me. I need your skills. William's tone was still businesslike, but Margaret could see the emotion he was barely controlling. And Mrs. Reed, Helen, she managed, wiping her eyes. Please, Helen, my mother mentioned you have multiple sclerosis. Our company health plan includes coverage at Hartley Medical Center. I'm arranging a consultation with Dr. Sarah Matthews. She's a specialist in MS treatment, one of the best in the country. The appointment will be next week, all costs covered by the company. Helen made a small broken sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. I don't know what to say. Say you'll go to the appointment. I'll go. Yes, thank you. William turned to look at the eviction notice still on the wall, and his expression hardened into something that would have terrified his corporate rivals. As for immediate housing, you can't stay here during the acquisition and renovation process. There's a corporate apartment available in Riverside Towers, 3 bedrooms, fully furnished, all utilities included. It's yours for as long as you need it. You can move in today. Today. Robert's voice cracked. The apartment is sitting empty. It's part of your compensation package. William's tone allowed no argument. I'll have my team arrange movers to help you pack. You'll have access to storage for anything you can't bring immediately. And when the building here is renovated, proper heat, updated wiring, new plumbing, everything up to code, you'll have first choice of units if you want to return. Or you can stay in Riverside, your choice. The room had gone completely silent except for Helen's quiet crying. Tommy was the one who finally broke the silence, his young voice small but steady. Why are you doing all this? We just helped someone. That's what you're supposed to do. William turned to look at the boy, and his expression softened into something Margaret had rarely seen on her son's face, genuine, unguarded emotion. You're right, it is what you're supposed to do, but most people don't. Most people look away. Most people decide it's not their problem. He gestured to the photograph on the table. 50 years ago your grandfather could have looked away. Everyone else had retreated. The enemy was closing in. It would have been the smart choice, the safe choice, the choice that would have kept him alive. But he didn't look away, Tommy said. No, he went back. He saved my father. And in doing so he saved my entire family's future. William's voice was thick now. And yesterday you had $5, your last $5, money your family desperately needed, and you gave it away to help a stranger. You could have looked away, but you didn't, because your grandfather's legacy is alive in you. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is for you, Tommy. It's not a gift, it's not charity, it's an investment in someone who understands what really matters. Tommy took the envelope with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a letter on Hartley Foundation letterhead. It's an educational trust, William explained. Full funding for your college education, wherever you choose to go, undergraduate and graduate school if you want it. You mentioned to my mother that you want to be a doctor. This ensures that dream is possible. Tommy stared at the letter, his lips moving as he read, his face showing the struggle to comprehend. When he looked up there were tears in his eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it to help people. The way your grandfather did. The way your father does. The way you already do. Robert stood abruptly, crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled William into a fierce embrace. Both men held each other tight, sons of soldiers who'd saved each other 50 years ago, connected across decades by sacrifice and honor. Thank you, Robert said into William's shoulder, his voice breaking. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for remembering. Dad would be so proud to know Arthur made it, that it mattered. It mattered, William said fiercely. It mattered then and it matters now. And Robert, he pulled back, gripping Robert's shoulders, looking him in the eye. I'm not being generous. This is a debt payment. Your father gave my father a future, and that future led to me, to our company, to everything we've built. Helping your family isn't charity. It's honoring what we owe. Helen had risen from her chair, moving carefully with her cane to join them. Margaret watched her son, her cold, controlled, emotionally distant son, gently embrace this woman he'd just met, supporting her carefully, mindful of her balance and her pain. Mrs. Reed, William said softly, your family inherited something more valuable than money. You inherited a legacy of courage and kindness that most people spend their whole lives searching for. Everything I'm doing is just trying to make sure that legacy doesn't get crushed by bad luck and bad people. You're a good man, Mr. Hartley, Helen whispered. William, please. William, then, your mother raised you right. William's laugh was wet with tears. My mother has been trying to teach me this lesson for 50 years. It took getting lost in a snowstorm and a 12-year-old boy with $5 to finally make me understand. He turned to Margaret, and something in his face made her heart swell. There was the son she'd raised, the boy who'd cared before the business had taught him to build walls, before success had made him think. Emotions were weakness. Thank you, Mother, he said quietly, for calling me, for making me come here, for giving me this chance. I didn't do anything, dear. Tommy did, and your father's guardian angel. Margaret moved to the dresser in the bedroom and retrieved the other photograph, the one she'd found last night. She brought it out and set it beside the one William had brought. Identical. 2 copies of the same moment, preserved across 50 years by 2 families who'd never known each other but who'd been bound together by fire and blood and salvation. Your father looked at his copy every day, Margaret said softly. Every single day for 42 years. He never forgot. He never stopped being grateful. And Robert, she turned to him. Your father kept his copy in a Bible, looked at it every Sunday, never stopped wondering if Arthur made it home. They're together now, Helen said quietly, looking down at this moment. I have to believe they're together, and they're happy we finally found each other. I believe it too, Margaret agreed. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity. William's team arrived, efficient professional people who began the process of helping the Reeds pack, while treating everything with respect, as if they were handling treasures instead of worn furniture and patched clothes. William arranged for a truck, for movers, for every detail to be handled. He called the corporate apartment to have it stocked with groceries, toiletries, anything the family might need. He assigned one of his assistants to help Helen coordinate her medical appointments. He promised Robert that HR would contact him next week to begin the onboarding process. Through it all, Margaret watched her son work, not as a CEO solving a problem, but as a man trying to pay a debt, trying to honor something sacred, trying to live up to the legacy his father had left him. At one point, as William was coordinating with his security team, Margaret pulled him aside. I'm proud of you, she said simply. William looked at her, and his eyes were bright. I almost lost you, Mother. When you didn't come home yesterday, when you didn't call, I thought. His voice broke. I thought I'd lost you, and I realized how much time I'd wasted, how much I'd let the company, the work, the success consume me until I forgot what really mattered. And what really matters. This, he gestured to the small apartment, to the Reed family packing their belongings with expressions of stunned hope, to the 2 photographs sitting side by side on the table. Connection. Gratitude, honoring the people who sacrifice for us. Being human, not just successful. Margaret touched his cheek gently. Your father would be so proud of the man you're becoming. I hope so. I'm trying. He smiled, tired but genuine. And Mother, I'm going to do more than just help this one family. I want to expand the foundation, create programs for families in crisis. Make sure there are other Tommy Reeds out there who don't have to choose between helping someone and having enough to eat. I think that's a wonderful idea. I want you to help me design it, you and the Reeds. Helen's experience as a writer, as someone who's lived through chronic illness and poverty, that's invaluable. Robert's analytical skills, Tommy's perspective as a young person growing up in these circumstances. I want their input on everything. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. When did you become so wise? Yesterday. When I almost lost you and realized that all the money and power in the world means nothing if you're alone. If you've forgotten how to connect with people. If you've built walls so high you can't let anyone in. He looked at the Reeds again, at the family laughing together as they packed, at the hope on their faces that hadn't been there this morning. They saved you, Mother, and in doing so they saved me too. I just didn't know I needed saving until I walked through that door and saw what real courage looks like. By early afternoon the Reeds were ready to leave. Their belongings, what few there were, had been carefully packed. The corporate apartment was prepared. A driver waited downstairs to take them to their new home. But before they left, William gathered everyone in the small living room one last time. "I want to give you something," he said, reaching into his briefcase. He pulled out a letter on heavy paper, sealed in an envelope, and handed it to Robert. "Don't open this now. Open it when you're settled, when you've had time to process everything that's happened. But I want you to know this is from my father. He wrote it 20 years ago, when he was sick, when he knew time was running out. It's the letter he wanted to give to William Reed if we ever found him." Robert took the envelope with trembling hands. "He wrote to my father. He wrote to his savior. He wrote to the man who gave him 42 more years of life. He wanted him to know that it mattered, that he never forgot, that every good thing that came after that day in Hugh was a gift from Sergeant William Reed." Margaret watched Robert clutch the envelope to his chest, watched him struggle with emotions too big for words. "And this," William said, pulling out a small velvet box, "is for you, Tommy." He opened it to reveal a simple silver pendant on a delicate chain. Engraved on the pendant were words, "You never left me behind." My mother had this made. She wore it every day for the last year of her life. He caught himself looking at Margaret with a small smile. "I mean, she had it made recently. She wants you to have it. She wants you to know that what you did, those $5, that kindness changed everything." Tommy took the pendant with shaking hands, his young face showing the weight of what he was holding. Not just metal and chain, but legacy and honor, and the knowledge that his actions had consequences far beyond what he could have imagined. "I just did what Grandpa would have done," he whispered. "I know," William said. "That's exactly why this matters, because you're living proof that the best parts of people don't die. They get passed down, they get carried forward. They change the world in ways we can't always see but that matter more than anything." Helen was crying again, but this time they were tears of joy, of relief, of hope finally returned after years of slow suffocation. Robert pulled his family close, Helen, Tommy, all of them holding each other in the middle of their shabby apartment that they were finally leaving behind. "Thank you," Robert said, looking at William and Margaret. "Thank you for seeing us, for remembering my father, for honoring what he did, for giving us back our future." "Thank you for giving us ours," William replied. 50 years ago and yesterday, your family keeps saving mine. We're just trying to keep up." As the Reeds headed downstairs to begin their new life, Margaret and William stood in the empty apartment, looking at the two photographs still sitting on the table. "We should frame these together," William said quietly. "Put them in the foundation lobby, a reminder of why we do this work. I think your father would like that. I think Sergeant Reed would too." They stood in silence for a long moment, two generations connected to two others across 50 years of separation and sacrifice and salvation finally recognized. "Come on, Mother," William said finally, offering her his arm. "Let's go home. We have a foundation to build." "We do indeed." "And William, yes, I'm very proud of you. I'm proud of us, of what we're going to do, of the legacy we're going to honor." They left the apartment together, leaving behind only the photographs, two copies of the same moment, two soldiers who'd saved each other, and never knew what came after. Now reunited in image if not in life. Outside the snow was melting. The sun was breaking through the clouds, and somewhere Margaret liked to think, two old soldiers were finally at peace, knowing that their sons had found each other, that the debt had been acknowledged, that the sacrifice hadn't been forgotten, that some things mattered more than survival, that some legacies lived on, that you never ever left people behind. The Hartley Foundation moved with the kind of efficiency that only unlimited resources and William Hartley's reputation could command. Within a week the acquisition of 414 Maple Street was complete. The price had been steep. Vickers had initially refused to sell, but when William's legal team presented him with detailed documentation of code violations, fraudulent insurance claims, and a pattern of tenant exploitation stretching back over a decade, his resistance crumbled quickly. He took the buyout and disappeared before criminal charges could be filed, though William made sure the relevant authorities had everything they needed to pursue him if they chose. Within 2 weeks, work crews had descended on the building like a construction army. The old heating system was ripped out and replaced with modern efficient units. The ancient wiring that had been a fire hazard for decades was updated to code. The corroded pipes that leaked and groaned were replaced with new copper, but William didn't stop there. He met personally with every tenant in the building, knocked on doors himself, sometimes with Robert beside him, sometimes with his mother, always with genuine interest in the people whose lives his foundation was now responsible for. Mrs. Chen, 92, and living on Social Security, who cried when William explained that her rent would be reduced by 40% and that the foundation would be adding an elevator to the building so she wouldn't have to climb stairs anymore. Mr. Kapoor with his bad hip, who'd lived in fear of Vickers for 20 years, who couldn't believe that someone actually cared whether his apartment was safe and warm. The Rodriguez family with 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment, who'd been saving for years to afford something better, who learned they'd be getting a larger unit at the same rent once renovations were complete. The young nurse working double shifts at the hospital, who'd been 1 rent payment from eviction when Vickers owned the building, who broke down sobbing when William promised her that would never happen again. Each one, William listened to. Each one, he made promises to. Each one, he made sure his team followed through on. Robert watched this transformation with something close to awe. He'd started his new job at Hartley Enterprises, and the difference between this company and his old employer was like the difference between daylight and darkness. On his first day, Jennifer Martinez, the COO, had greeted him personally. "Robert Reed, I've heard a lot about you. Good things, I hope," Robert had said nervously. "The best things. William says you see patterns in data that other people miss. Says you have the same gift his father had, seeing what matters when everyone else is looking at the wrong things." She'd smiled warmly. "We're very glad to have you here. And Robert, you belong here. Don't let anyone, including yourself, make you think otherwise." She'd been right to warn him about his own doubts. The first week was overwhelming. Learning new systems, meeting colleagues who'd all gone to prestigious universities and spoke the language of corporate success with native fluency. Robert kept waiting for someone to realize they'd made a mistake, that he was just a construction worker pretending to be an analyst. But by the second week something shifted. He'd been assigned to review the company's supply chain efficiency, looking for redundancies and cost-saving opportunities. It was supposed to be a long-term project, something to get him acclimated to how the company operated. Robert found a critical flaw in 3 days. A redundancy in the shipping logistics system that was costing the company thousands of dollars daily in delayed shipments and excess inventory. It was hidden in the data, invisible unless you knew how to look at the patterns rather than the individual numbers. But once Robert saw it, it was obvious, a cascade effect where each small delay compounded into major problems downstream. He'd been terrified to present his findings. What if he was wrong? What if this was some intentional system he didn't understand? What if he embarrassed himself in front of people who actually knew what they were doing? But he'd remembered his father's words. You don't leave people behind. You don't look away when you see something wrong. You speak up. So he'd prepared a presentation and requested a meeting with Jennifer. She'd listened to his 15-minute analysis in complete silence, her face unreadable. When he finished, she'd stared at his charts for a long moment. "How long did this take you?" "About 40 hours of analysis over the past 3 days. We've had consultants working on efficiency for 6 months. They billed us $200,000 and found nothing remotely this significant." She'd looked up at him with something close to wonder. "Robert, you just saved this company approximately $3 million annually." He'd called William personally that afternoon, still shaking with disbelief. "I heard," William had said, and Robert could hear the smile in his voice. "Jennifer called me an hour ago. Said you're everything I claimed and more. I just did my job." "No, you did what most people can't do. You saw what others missed." William's voice had grown serious. "Your father saw what others missed. He saw a man worth saving when everyone else saw a tactical situation requiring retreat. That ability to see what matters when everyone else is looking away, that's in your blood, Robert. That's why you're here. Use it." The validation had meant everything. For the first time in 6 months, Robert felt like himself again. Not a construction worker playing pretend. Not a failure who'd lost his job. but an analyst who could do things other people couldn't, who had value, who belonged. He'd gone home that night to the corporate apartment, still surreal, still beautiful, still almost too much to believe, and told Helen and Tommy the whole story. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Tommy had said, simple and sincere, and Robert had realized something profound. He was proud of himself too. For the first time in a very long time, Helen's transformation was slower but no less significant. The appointment with Dr. Sarah Matthews had been intimidating. The Hartley Medical Center was the kind of place where presidents and celebrities went for treatment, all glass and marble and cutting-edge technology that felt designed to remind you how expensive everything was. But Dr. Matthews herself had been refreshingly direct. In her 50s, brilliant, with kind eyes and no patience for condescension or pity. "I've reviewed your medical history," she'd said after the examination. "Your MS is progressive and we can't reverse the damage that's already been done. I need you to understand that clearly. I can't cure you. I understand, but there are new treatments now. Medications that weren't available even 2 years ago that can significantly slow progression and in some cases improve certain symptoms. I can't promise you'll get better, but I can promise we'll fight like hell to keep you from getting worse." Helen had liked her immediately. They'd started an aggressive treatment plan, expensive medications that would have been completely impossible before, physical therapy 3 times a week, occupational therapy to help her adapt to doing daily tasks more easily, a nutritionist, a pain management specialist. The kind of comprehensive, coordinated care that Helen had only dreamed about. Within 6 weeks she noticed improvements, small things at first, less pain in her joints, slightly better balance, mornings where the fatigue wasn't quite as crushing. The neurologist was cautiously optimistic that the disease progression was stabilizing, but the biggest change wasn't physical, it was hope. For the first time in years, Helen woke up thinking maybe tomorrow wouldn't inevitably be worse than today, maybe tomorrow might actually be better. Maybe she had a future that wasn't just managing decline but actually living. She started writing again. It had been years since she'd had the energy and focus for sustained creative work. The MS made concentration difficult, made sitting at a computer painful, made the act of creation feel like pushing against an impossible weight. But now, with the pain managed better, with the fatigue less crushing, with the hope that maybe she had time, she opened up her old files and started writing. Short stories at first, tentative, rusty, her skills atrophied from years of disuse. But Margaret had connected her with an editor named Patricia Chen, who specialized in working with writers who had disabilities, who understood that productivity looked different for different people, and that was okay. Patricia had read Helen's first story, a quiet piece about a mother trying to maintain dignity while her body betrayed her, and called her personally. "This is extraordinary," she'd said. "Raw and honest and beautiful. I want to send this to 3 literary magazines I work with, and Helen, I think you have a collection in you. Will you let me help you shape it?" Helen had cried. Not because of the potential publication though that mattered, but because someone believed her words had value, that she was more than her illness, that she still had something to contribute to the world. Working with Patricia over the following months was transformative. The editor pushed Helen to dig deeper, to trust her voice, to stop apologizing for writing about disability and illness, and instead embrace it as her unique perspective, her truth that other people needed to hear. "The world is full of stories about healthy people doing heroic things," Patricia had said. "We need more stories about people doing heroic things in everyday life while managing chronic illness. About mothers who get their kids to school, and make dinner and help with homework while fighting their own bodies every step of the way. About the quiet courage that most people never see because it doesn't look like courage in the movies." Within 3 months, Patricia had placed 2 of Helen's stories in respected literary magazines. Within 6 months she was negotiating a contract for a collection with a small but prestigious press. The day Helen signed that contract was one of the happiest of her life. Not because of the money, the advance was modest, a few $1,000s, but because it meant someone thought her words mattered, that her experience had value. That she was still herself, still whole, still capable of creating something beautiful despite everything the disease had taken from her. Robert had opened a bottle of wine they'd been saving for a special occasion. Tommy had made a banner that said "Published Author" in careful block letters. Margaret and William had sent flowers with a card that read "Your voice matters. Your story matters. We're so proud of you." That night, lying in bed in their comfortable apartment with working heat and no eviction notice looming, Helen had turned to Robert. "Are we allowed to be this happy?" she'd whispered. "After so many years of barely surviving, is it okay to be happy?" "Yes," Robert had said firmly, pulling her close. "Yes, we're allowed. We earned this. Not just through suffering but through keeping our values, through raising our son right, through staying decent when the world gave us every reason to become bitter. We earned this. I keep waiting for it to disappear, for someone to realize they made a mistake and take it all back. It's not going to disappear. This is real. This is our life now." Helen had cried then, releasing years of tension and fear, and the constant bracing for the next disaster. And Robert had held her while she wept, his own tears falling into her hair, both of them finally allowing themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. Tommy's adjustment to Riverside Academy was perhaps the most complex of all. He'd expected to feel out of place, the scholarship kid from Millbrook in a school full of children whose parents were doctors and lawyers and executives. And at first he did. The other students talked about vacation homes and ski trips and summer programs in Europe. They wore expensive clothes without thinking about it, replaced their phones when new models came out, complained about having only 2 cars in their family. It would have been easy to feel bitter, to resent their ease, their assumption that the world was safe and abundant, and would always provide for them. But Tommy remembered what his father had told him the night before his first day. "You're not there to compete with them about who has more stuff, you're there to learn. To become the kind of doctor who can help people like your mom, like Mrs. Hartley, like everyone we knew in the old neighborhood who couldn't afford good medical care. Don't lose sight of why you're there." So Tommy focused on learning, and discovered something surprising. Being behind in some subjects meant he had to work harder, and working harder meant he learned more deeply than students who'd always found school easy. He was behind in English literature. His old school's curriculum was years behind Riverside's. But his English teacher, Mr. Harrison, noticed his struggle and offered to meet with him twice a week before school to help him catch up. "You write with unusual maturity, Mr. Harrison had said during one of these sessions, reviewing an essay Tommy had written about poverty and the grapes of wrath. "You understand Steinbeck's characters in a way many students don't. You know what it's like to be invisible to the world." Tommy had looked up surprised. "How did you know?" "I grew up poor too," Mr. Harrison had said simply. "Worked construction to pay for community college, then transferred to university on scholarship. I know what it's like to sit in a classroom full of rich kids and feel like you're from a different planet. Does it get easier? It gets different. You learn that having more stuff doesn't make people better or smarter or more worthy. You learn that your perspective, your understanding of struggle and resilience and what really matters is valuable. Maybe more valuable than anything they can learn from textbooks." The conversation had stayed with Tommy. He started seeing his background not as a deficit but as a different kind of education. He knew things his classmates didn't, knew how to make $3 stretch for a meal, knew how to patch clothes instead of replacing them, knew how to comfort his mother when pain made her cry, knew how to recognize when someone needed help even if they didn't ask. In science he excelled. His natural aptitude for biology and chemistry became obvious quickly, and his science teacher, Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, noticed immediately. "Tommy, can you stay after class?" He'd stayed nervous. In his experience, being asked to stay after class meant trouble. "I've been looking at your placement tests," Dr. Rodriguez had said. "You're working at an 11th grade level in biology and chemistry. You're in 8th grade. Is that bad?" "Bad. Tommy, it's exceptional. I want to recommend you for our advanced science program. You take classes with older students, get access to the university lab facilities we partner with, work on actual research projects. Would that interest you?" "I don't know if I'm smart enough." "You are, trust me. The question is whether you're interested." He'd thought about his mother, managing her MS with dignity. He'd thought about Margaret, facing dementia with grace. He'd thought about all the people in his old neighborhood who'd been sick and couldn't afford proper care. "I want to be a doctor," he'd said. "Someday, I want to help people who are sick." Dr. Rodriguez had smiled. "Then this is exactly where you should be. Let's make it happen." So Tommy had joined the advanced program, found himself in labs with juniors and seniors, running experiments that would have been impossible at his old school. learning from Dr. Rodriguez how to think like a scientist, asking questions, testing hypotheses, following evidence wherever it led. He discovered he loved research, loved the methodical process of investigation, the satisfaction of finding answers, the possibility that maybe, someday, he could discover something that would help people like his mom. But the most important lesson came from an unexpected source. 3 months into the school year, a new student arrived. Jasmine. She was quiet, kept to herself, wore the same 3 outfits in rotation. Tommy recognized the signs immediately, the careful way she handled her textbooks like they were precious because they probably were, the way she packed her lunch instead of buying cafeteria food, the way she sat alone because making friends required time and energy she was probably spending on other things. She was from Millbrook. Tommy knew without asking, knew because he recognized himself in her wariness, her careful invisibility. One day at lunch, he saw 3 of the wealthy kids laughing at her worn backpack, saw her face flush with shame as she tried to ignore them, saw her gather her things to leave, and Tommy thought about his grandfather, about not leaving people behind, about the legacy that had saved his family. He picked up his lunch and walked over to her table. "Hey, I'm Tommy, mind if I sit?" She'd looked up, surprised and suspicious. "Why?" "Because I remember what it's like to be new. And because anyone who thinks a backpack says something important about a person is an idiot." Jasmine's surprise had shifted to a small, tentative smile. "You're from Millbrook too, aren't you?" 414 Maple Street U, 7th and Oak. "I know that area. The bus from there is terrible. The worst." They talked through lunch. About the neighborhood they'd both left, about the adjustment to Riverside, about feeling like aliens in a world of abundance, and Tommy had realized something. The legacy his grandfather had given him wasn't just about helping people in obvious crisis. It was about seeing people, about recognizing when someone was alone and scared and choosing to show up. Jasmine became his friend, and through her Tommy found other scholarship students, other kids from neighborhoods like his, other people navigating the gap between 2 worlds. They formed a study group that met in the library after school, helped each other with classwork, shared resources, looked out for each other, and slowly, Tommy began to understand what Mr. Harrison had meant. His background wasn't a deficit, it was a foundation. It gave him empathy the wealthy kids often lacked. It gave him resilience they'd never needed to develop. It gave him perspective about what actually mattered in life. When he told his parents about Jasmine and the study group, his father had pulled him into a fierce hug. "Your grandfather would be so proud," Robert had said, his voice thick. "Not because you're getting good grades or going to a fancy school, but because you're living the legacy. You're not leaving people behind." "I just did what felt right." That's exactly the point. It felt right because of who you are, because of what we taught you, because of what Grandpa taught Dad. The legacy doesn't die, Tommy. It lives in choices like that. In seeing someone who needs a friend and choosing to be one. 6 months after that snowy January night, the Hartley Foundation held its first public event. The Reed Building, as William had insisted on naming it, over Robert's embarrassed protests, had been completely renovated. The old decrepit structure at 414 Maple Street had been transformed into a model of what affordable housing could be. Modern, efficient, beautiful but not ostentatious. Every unit with working heat, updated wiring, safe plumbing, an elevator for elderly and disabled residents, a community room on the first floor, a small playground in the back for children. The grand reopening was attended by local officials, foundation staff, and most importantly, the tenants whose lives had been changed. Mrs. Chen, who'd lived in fear for 20 years, stood in the community room with tears running down her face. "I never thought I'd see this, a place that's actually safe, that doesn't make me afraid every winter that the heat will fail, that treats me like a person, not a problem." Mr. Kapoor showed off his renovated apartment, accessible bathroom, wider doorways for his walker, grab bars installed everywhere he needed them. "I can shower safely now. I can move around my own home without being afraid of falling. Do you know what that means to someone my age? Dignity. That's what this is. You gave me my dignity back." The Rodriguez family had moved into a 3-bedroom unit. The kids finally had their own rooms, space to study, space to breathe. "We were saving for years to afford something better," Mrs. Rodriguez said.
and now it came to us. Our kids can focus on school instead of cramped quarters and constant stress. You gave them a future, but William's speech was what brought the room to tears. He stood at the podium, not as a CEO but as a son honoring his father's legacy, and told the story about Arthur Hartley and Sergeant William Reed, about a burning building in Vietnam and a decision to not leave someone behind, about 50 years of separation and a snowstorm that brought two families back together. My father was saved by a man named William Reed, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. Sergeant Reed could have retreated with everyone else. It would have been the smart choice, the safe choice, but he heard someone screaming in the rubble, and he made a different choice. He went back. He saved my father, and in doing so he saved my entire family's future. He gestured to Robert, Helen and Tommy, standing in the front row. 50 years later, Sergeant Reed's grandson made the same choice. Tommy Reed saw a stranger in distress and didn't look away. He gave his last $5 to help someone he'd never met and would likely never see again. He brought her to his home, to his family, who shared their last meal with her despite facing eviction themselves. William's voice grew thick with emotion. That stranger was my mother. And that family was the family of the man who'd saved my father. The legacy didn't die, it lived. In Robert, who taught his son to value people over things. In Helen, who welcomed a stranger into her home with genuine kindness. In Tommy, who acted with the same courage his grandfather showed half a century ago. He paused, looking around the room at the faces watching him. This building isn't named the Reed Building because we're being generous. It's named that because we're paying a debt. Because the Reed family showed us what real wealth looks like. Not money, or power, or success, but the courage to help people even when it costs you everything. That's the legacy this foundation honors. That's the standard we're trying to live up to. The applause was thunderous. But for Tommy, sitting between his parents, the most meaningful moment came later. After the speeches, after the tours, after the celebration, Margaret pulled him aside. "Walk with me," she asked. They walked through the renovated building together, this elderly woman and this young man, connected by $5 and a snowstorm and a legacy neither of them had fully understood until it brought them together. "Do you know what you did?" Margaret asked, as they paused by a window overlooking the small playground. "I helped you, that's all." "No, that's not all." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "You changed the trajectory of lives. My life. Your family's lives. Everyone in this building. Every family the foundation will help in the future. All of it traces back to you choosing to give $5 when you had nothing to spare. Grandpa would have done the same. Yes, and so would you. That's the point. The legacy didn't die with your grandfather. It lived in your father, and now it lives in you." And Tommy, she took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "What you do with your life, how you choose to help people, the legacy you pass on, that matters more than you can possibly imagine." "I want to be a doctor," Tommy said quietly. "I want to help people like you and my mom. People who are sick and scared and need someone to see them as humans, not just symptoms. You'll be an extraordinary doctor because you'll remember this. You'll remember what it's like to have nothing and still choose generosity. You'll remember what it's like to be afraid and have someone show up for you. You'll remember that healing is about more than medicine. It's about dignity and recognition and refusing to leave people behind." Tommy looked out at the building his grandfather's legacy had helped create, at the children playing safely in the new playground, at the lights glowing warm in apartments where people could finally rest without fear. "I won't forget," he promised. "I'll never forget." "Good, because the world needs more people who remember, who see what others miss, who choose kindness even when it's hard." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the building that bore Tommy's grandfather's name, both of them understanding that some legacies were worth more than money, or power, or success. Some legacies were about seeing people, about not looking away, about never ever leaving anyone behind.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.